Phil have already gotten there. So fingers crossed no one falls off the stage today. And the best treat of all is this session is interactive. So be thinking about what questions you want to ask. I'd like to introduce the Scholarly Kitchen Executive Editor, David Crotty.
All right. So do we have slides? Are they ready? Thanks to everybody for sticking around. I'm a little surprised to see this many people at the last session. It's always a little surprise. We always sort of think it's just going to be us hanging around talking. So rather than ending the meeting with sort of a recap of what we all just heard, we sort of want to end the meeting by thinking about the future. And so what we've done is we've gone back and tried to pull some running threads from posts that have run through the Scholarly Kitchen and think about what are these themes that we're really thinking about going forward. So I put the question to my fellow Scholarly Kitchen chefs, what's next? We're going to do 4 very short presentations to start the ball rolling on hopefully what will be a lively discussion with you about the changing role of stakeholders in our community, or if you're all talked out at this point, we can just talk among ourselves. Do we want to introduce ourselves, or do people know who you are, or do we have a microphone? I guess we don't have a microphone. We'll introduce ourselves as we start speaking. So I'm going to start with this first notion of the where I think we're going as publishers. And I'll start with this post. Last summer, I was asked to give a talk at the ISMTE meeting, and they said, give us a rundown on the current state of the industry. And I wrote it up for this post, and to me, a key concept is this idea, this shift of publishers from content companies to a future of us as a service industry. And to be fair, I think this has always been the case anyway. We are a service industry, and journals perform a long list of services, meeting important needs for researchers that they have for things like communication, career advancement, filtering out where they should spend their very precious time and attention. And doing those things, is, particularly doing those things well with rigor and care, costs money. So generally, traditionally at least, we provide those services to authors at no charge, and then in exchange, we receive the rights to sell access to the resulting article. The authors essentially pass the costs along to the consumers of the research in the broader community, and then the publisher attempts to make back their costs and then some by selling subscriptions. But subscriptions have in a lot of ways hit a wall. Every year, the number of people doing research increases, the pressure to publish or perish means more and more papers come out. And at the same time, universities continue to decrease the percentage of funds that they put toward their libraries. That means the total picture remains flat at best, and in reality, it's declining. So publishers, and particularly commercial publishers, are under a lot of pressure to increase their revenues every year, which is really tough in a flat economy. That's why you're seeing so many mergers and acquisitions. The easiest way to increase revenue is to gobble up a bigger share of the existing market. It's also helped driving the uptake of open access, the second point here, because in a lot of cases, the funds for open access are additive to the existing market. They come from sources other than library serials budgets. But the third point here is where the really interesting stuff is happening, new product development. Given that we're in this era where we're seeing a shift, a real desire for increased openness, we're seeing publishers really starting to shift their business further and further away from providing free services and then relying on the sale of content to pay for them. We're seeing this sort of general loosening of the grip on the research paper and moving more towards a direct service economy. So open access is a really simple example of this. The author needs some services performed, they pay for them in a direct exchange, and the content's made freely available. But in some ways, that's just providing the same services we already provide and just shifting the point of payment. It's less interesting to me than venturing into new areas, and an interesting comment from Roger Schoenfeld recently was the paper's metadata may have more value, maybe more valuable than its content. Some of the bigger publishers, and this post by Roger I think is a great one, they've sort of taken the lead here. There's a strong advantage to having the economic clout and the ability to take financial risk. Digital sciences, I think, is a really good example now that it's spun off from Springer Nature, rather. I think it's a really good example. A publisher's parent company is now investing very heavily in the things around the publications rather than the publications themselves. And this post here, Roger talked about Elsevier, and I think they're also a company that's worth watching in this space. In recent years, they've acquired assets like Mendeley and Social Sciences Research Network, and they've built their own systems like Scopus. And here, Roger really talked about their move into workflow services, essentially inserting themselves into almost every aspect of the research process. Another example we heard about yesterday in one of the sessions was Elsevier's work with the University of Florida, offering the school a sort of Pandora or Spotify-like streaming service as their institutional repository. And also, I thought really interesting, this post Roger talked about EBSCO and their move into scholarly discovery and access workflow. And I think it also speaks to the sort of convergence and consolidation of the industry that we're sort of seeing vendors and publishers moving into the same space as the market consolidates. I'll stop here with a couple what I think are important questions. I mean, I work at OUP. We pride ourselves on creating this very high quality content, but if the content, being a content creator is no longer a viable business, what does that make us? What are we to be? What services can we offer that are valuable and useful to the research community? And second, you know, for the independents, the not-for-profits, can we establish ourselves in these markets, or are we just going to be reliant upon the big guys and we'll be renting services from them? So now I will turn things over to Todd, who's going to talk about libraries.
So my name is Todd Karp, and I'm the Executive Director of NISO. How many of you are librarians? Quick show of hands. Fantastic. It's been a mission of SSP over the years to try and bring more librarians into this meeting in this community, and so I'm glad to see that there are many more of you. And then I'll begin by apologizing to all of you, since I am not a librarian. I speak for librarians occasionally, but I am not one. But I do want to think about some of the issues related to libraries, and so some of the themes during the conference and some of the things that come out in the Scholarly Kitchen impact our community broadly. And the first of these is money, of course. I think money has always been an issue in the library community. Back in the days when I was selling subscription, it was always the easiest answer. We don't have resources to buy more products. But I think we're kind of entering a tipping point, and the keynote presentation from Professor Stefan really touched on this. And I think the confluence of decreasing government funding, the fact that most students are tapped out, they can't borrow any more money, state and local governments are not going to give academic institutions any more resources, I don't think. Potentially the only area where money will continue to grow has to do with endowments, and not every institution has endowments. So I think we're probably getting into an area where, as David mentioned in kind of this peak subscription area, we're going to see the screws of financial limitations really impacting our community in terms of declining subscriptions, declining resources. And I think that's going to be a key and growing issue facing our community going forward. Another issue that I think is really worth considering is the alignment between the library's goals and missions and the overall institution's goals and missions. And are those two adequately aligned? Are they appropriately aligned? Many of the things that libraries have traditionally focused attention on measuring, the bibliometrics, are usually internally focused. They're not externally focused. how many searches are done doesn't give an indication of how much learning is taking place or how much research is taking place at the institution. And I see in many institutions a challenge of how those institutional goals are potentially misaligned. And Rick's post on this was fantastic about this. But I think it is going to apply in a variety of different areas. I mean, there was a session earlier today on resource access and how are we providing authentication systems to patrons. Now, most of the IT is run through a separate department. And if there's a desire to change authentication systems, that's not going to be done directly through the library. It's going to have to be done in partnership with the other institutional elements like the IT department. And is there enough collaboration, enough understanding of a joint mission in order to make sure that those things happen? Similarly with open access, a lot of the advocates of open access have come within the scholarly communications community, the librarian community. Does that always align with the mission and goals of the institution? Sometimes it does in some institutions, not always. What are the implications of that? Another big issue for the library community has to do with privacy. Didn't spend a lot of time here at SSP talking about privacy, but it is something that the library community spends a great deal of time and energy and effort thinking about. But unfortunately, in our current web environment, more and more users expect personalization. They expect customization, which demands a certain amount of private information. And are library services going to keep up in that environment? It's an open question. And then kind of ending with the big question that I think is facing the library community. What is a library today? What is the core service of a library? Is it collections management? Is it acquisitions? Is it purchasing and providing access to the community? Is it fostering scholarly communications and open access? What about repositories of information that many institutions are supporting and creating? Is it the broad repository of human knowledge that is sort of the vision and goal of many librarians? Also, is it kind of many institutions are moving in the direction of supporting workflows and providing tools and analysis? What role is the library playing in those areas? And is the institutional leadership and had the decisions about that question, about what it means to be a library, is going to affect subsequent decisions about what they purchase, what directions, where their investments go? I think that's a real core issue and concern for the library community. So, next we're going to move on to the changing role of research societies. And that's Robert.
So I was actually going to get a microphone and wander around and give what I was going to call a Bob talk. But if I do this, I don't know if you... I have a loud voice. Can you hear me anyway?
It's probably being recorded, so...
Oh, anyway, so I won't do that. Instead, I'll stare down here and have a look. Oh, I can stare over here. And there's also this very disconcerting... I don't know if anybody's been up here. And there's a countdown clock, which at the moment is saying 53, 09, 08, etc. And there's a green light. So I'm wondering what happens when you get to the red light. Is there a ticking noise?
The waterfall starts again.
Okay, all right. Okay, good. Well, I'm just going to hang on. So my job, so first of all, I'm Robert Harrington, and I'm at a society. I work at the American Mathematical Society. I'm their associate executive director, responsible for publishing stuff. And the American Mathematical Society is one of many research societies, but of course it's a very diverse set of societies that are out there, ranging across all different types of size and profile, serving different types of community, from research to professional and so on. So, when I speak, it's from my own perspective, and I try and be empathic, but it's hard to be empathic because I'm a man. It's hard. What I've tried to do is to just outline some of the major things that actually are of concern to me, to societies. Top, perhaps, amongst those is this idea of membership. I think for all of the societies that I am at least aware of, actually it's not all. I know I saw a good talk from the Speech Language Hearing Association. Oh yes, I should go down. Oh, that one. Okay, you see it right there. Good.
One on the left.
One on the left. Thank you.
No problem.
So, yes, where was I? Oh yes, top among these is membership. And not all societies are in the same position, of course. There's a great talk from someone from the Speech Language Hearing Association where they're actually growing membership. For most of us, membership is declining, and that's of concern. So what is it that, one of the things I want to address here, and you can see some of the, I'm going to try pressing this actually a little bit here. We had an Ask the Chefs post where many of us contributed, organized by Anne Michael here, where we asked, what does it mean to be a part of a membership organization? And I think the overriding sentiment, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the overriding sentiment, yes, benefits are important. What's in it for me, the whiffy factor. But actually, for the future going forward, it's also about the sense of community, especially in the age that we're in. This idea of belonging to a community in which that matters to my career, that I can affect the careers of others, that I can support those who are in the same sort of endeavors that I'm in. Perhaps that's the future for membership and sort of a sense of belonging. So that's a question that I also want to put out there. What does it mean to join? What does it mean for my careers? So that's something we can address. I also thought I'd put up this wasn't a post that I think I had up there on societies, actually. From de Tocqueville, it just felt right for the age in which we're in, of politically, if you can call it an age. It's not too depressing to say we're in a particular situation. But so Americans of all ages, all conditions, all minds constantly unite. There's nothing, according to me, that deserves more to attract our regard than the intellectual and moral associations of America. In democratic countries, that's said in a British accent, of course, but in democratic countries, the science of association is the mother science. The progress of all the others depends on the progress of that one. That's from Democracy in America by Tocqueville. So, it's very, very much of our time. So when we think about societies, there was a great post, and this dates back a little bit, but we revisit this post, I think, every year, from Joe Esposito, who talked about what it means to govern in a not-for-profit setting. And he was asking the questions, what are the reasons why the not-for-profits are not as successful in scale and in monetary terms and all aspects as the commercial sector? And he said, well, it's not just scale. I mean, they all started out small as well. It's not money. But it comes down, in his view at least, to the way that decisions are taken. There's we're often editorially driven. We're often not equipped, perhaps, to take the sorts of decisions that you might need to take, and that might be commercial decisions. So we need to think about those sorts of things as societies. So really, that's where I'm going from on this particular. This is also a question. How do we, as societies, as not-for-profit institutions serving our communities, combine the best of our mission with a sense of the business, and how can we do that most effectively so that we can compete? We're never going to quite compete on scale with Elsevier, with Springer, and so on, but we can matter. One thing that's been on my mind, and this may be on many of your minds, perhaps not just in society settings, of course, is that in our outfit, a lot of great people who have been there for many years. Average sort of time span at our term of employment at our place is about 25 years. That's the average. You don't even get your bio read out at award ceremonies until you've been there 20 years, I think. So, but a lot of these people are retiring. They're taking with them amazing skills. So we have to think about how we replace those people. Do we do it the same way? Do we replace them? Do we outsource? What are the benefits and concerns attached with that? And I'd love to hear from this group whether you have the same sorts of concerns, what are you doing in that respect? And there I put a bunch of posts that are really fascinating here. There's a Joe Esposito, there's a Michael Clark, and of course the best one is mine. But societies are dealing with issues of scale, as I alluded to just a little earlier. How do we honestly really compete when it comes to book publishing, to journal publishing, and all aspects of what we do? And do we remain? Some of us are resolutely independent. That's us at the AMS, but there are others who do have different sorts of arrangements. Maybe some of what they do, they outsource to, they have arrangements where some of it's outsourced to vendors, or perhaps they have licensing deals with publishers. Many publishers in this room will work directly with societies, and very good partnerships. Or perhaps there's acquisition. It doesn't happen so often, but societies can acquire content too, so maybe that's something that's of interest. Acquisition is not off the table. Many societies think it's just not relevant for them. Innovation. You need to have a rebel in your midst, someone who's really capable of shifting you. It's very comfortable to sit in a certain place, but you need to be able to think. How are you addressing innovation? And strategic planning. Michael Clark, who's sitting somewhere down there, over there, sorry, did a really good post on this, and really addressing what you mean by strategic planning. It's not this big tome. It's not something you can ignore. There are so many aspects to strategic planning, and it really is a living, breathing entity that you want to continue and operationalize and think through as you're working. It's not something to be scared of, and you want to have those who are in power, often the academics themselves, really invested in what you're doing, and you want to have it done in a way that's not just publishing. In societies, there's programs, there's meetings, there's membership, and you want to have this coalesced as much as possible. So how do you do it? Strategic planning is one of those things that's a little scary at times, and it may be tempting to say, oh, we don't need to do it. Things are changing so fast. So the key questions, I've kind of mentioned those, but the key questions I have for this audience are, what is the future for us as a membership society? How do we think about membership? Are we interested in growth? Is mission so important? What does mission mean to you? I sometimes wonder whether is it growth we're after or just sustainability in support of the mission. I often do think of things that way. Sustainability is still being businesslike. You don't always have to grow to satisfy shareholder value, of course, but perhaps that means growth in the current setting. So what are the challenges you face? And with that, I will shut up and pass on to Life in a Post-Truth World by the amazing and wonderful, your host, Kent Anderson.
No, he's double acting. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to keep him vaguely on track.
Sorry, and Dave Smith.
All right, so David and I are going to talk about what I think is probably the most important issue we're currently facing, and it's led to a series of posts from me and then a couple from other people that Roger Schoenfeld jokingly called my "What Hath We Wrought" posts. So what kind of started this was the realization that we live in a political climate in the United States, at least, and one that actually extends farther than the United States. It actually started with Brexit, hence my British friend here.
Hands up if you're British, come on. Yeah.
Hands up if you're Anglophile, come on. All right. But it was around the time of a publishing meeting here in the United States, and one person couldn't attend because the travel ban was in motion. And visa was not being issued in time, and it was a friend of the industry from Elsevier, so had to sit it out. That is an incredible block of activity, and it threatened a lot of what might, foreshadowed a lot of what might be coming. So then you started to see librarians responding. You started to see the beginning, the inklings of the resistance, as it's been called. But you also saw some other reactions, authors seeking anonymity, the immigration of scientists and physicians starting to divert around these interferences, some defunding of meetings, detention of scientists and physicians at the border, and concerns about the free flow of information. And then, in the UK...
Yeah, so in the UK, this is the UK government telling, well, one,
Sure,
they
this
don't
is
know
how we'll do it.
one, they don't know how publishing actually works, telling you when you're going to get your item published, like we're going to give that information out. But one of the key things there is that's the UK government telling people that we want to look at your work first. Thank you very much indeed.
And some other interesting tweets about the moon's gravity not causing tides. It was the sun causing tides.
Yep.
Because they're scientists.
Yep.
But of course, scientists aren't experts because they're in academia. They don't have any life experience in the real world. And the UK government previously wanted to work for the best experts, but they disqualified some people because they were not UK citizens. So your expertise now depends on your citizenship status. But it all kicked off with our friend here, Mr. Puffy Face. Do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so Michael Gove, MP, obviously those of us who are Brits know all about him, but this was a key quote right at the height of the debate, the referendum about whether we should leave the European Union or not, and his quote was, "People in this country have had enough of experts."
Tired of them.
And that should be quite a chilling thing for everybody in this room, actually.
Yeah, I don't want anyone who knows about bacterial disease to handle my food. That'd be terrible. So, but on top of all of this, the political interference, the ignorance that has been elected into populist regimes and things of that nature, we also have we're in the midst of, I believe, and a lot of people believe, a cyber war. So we have information warfare. We have hackers perpetuating misinformation. We have Sci-Hub being leveraged as a security threat against academic institutions. We have attacks on the basic information infrastructure going on, and exploitation of disruption, because disruption is actually a path for people to come in and interfere. And then you have Silicon Valley and their technocratic culture that has basically wedged algorithms into the environment, so there are no longer neutral intermediaries, but there are activist intermediaries that are trying to derive commercial benefit from driving people to information that's more clickable. So it creates markets, it doesn't create knowledge. It leaves publishers, in many cases, shouting into the void about vaccines or global warming or what have you, which ultimately leads to science suffering in the culture. I think, one of our speakers, Jeff Mervis, was a little superficial in that. There are deeper, deeper problems than what government is doing. But there are positives, potentially.
Yeah, so for those of you that are not familiar, Alexa is basically an interface device, an ambient interface device that lives in your living room or wherever you might put it, and has a backport to one of the most powerful artificial intelligences on the planet. That's the one that Amazon has built on their AWS services. So here we've got various things that you might be able to do. And here's one of the key things, right? So motivated publishers that want to get their messages across can make sure that people at home can ask those publishers to supply them information in an ambient basis. So, allowing them to get their world-class content in a totally new but fun and easy way, and in the UK in a lovely lady's home county's received pronunciation accent, and she can say things like, "Enemies of the people, fury over out-of-touch judges who have declared war on democracy by defying 17.4 million Brexit voters and who could trigger constitutional crisis."
Or the alternative voice. Can I see that again?
Move on.
Yeah, moving on. It's getting punch drunk up here. But artificial intelligence may have the potential to change a lot of things, or it may not. Again, there's a black box aspect to this, and Google is doing a lot to publish research in this area. They're leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else, but now you have Facebook trying to catch up through their acquisition of Meta, their funding of bioRxiv. So they're trying to get into the scientific space in this way and really do some things that we aren't quite sure what they're trying to do, frankly. It all comes down to who's in control here and how do we regain control. It used to be that publishers and editors would work together to know what was being sent out, and readers would decide what they wanted to receive, and the intermediaries in between were neutral, the bookstore, the mailman, the kid delivering your newspaper. But now the intermediaries are not neutral. And the algorithms are not benign. They are driven by commercial forces. How do we reassert control over the technology so that it is ethically and truthful, so it's truthful to us, right? So some of the key questions, have intermediaries become non-neutral? I believe they have. Are hackers exploiting our penchant to be disrupted? While you may have Alexa in your home, Alexa has also helped people solve crimes because she listens all the time. And your Fitbit has been, that's been used to solve crimes because the guy said, well, my wife fell down and died, and then they noticed that her Fitbit was traveling in the trunk of his car. How quickly will AI make a difference? Who establishes the truth? Will science advance or regress? And ultimately, who is in control here? Thanks.
All right, so I think we've done our duty, as Chicken Little publishers, to tell you that the sky is falling. As a pessimistic industry, my favorite publishing joke is always that the first book off the Gutenberg printing press was the Bible, and the second was about the decline of the publishing industry. So I want to open it up to some of our chefs who didn't give a quick talk for your thoughts or comments, and then let's get hopefully some audience questions going. I don't know if we have microphones going around or, okay, we do have microphones going around, so raise your hand if you have a question. Comments from the Peanut Gallery? Judy, who's got a mic? Who wants to?
Yeah, all right, I've got a live mic. I'll go. Judy Luther, Informed Strategies. I'm just going to make a few comments based on the sessions I've been to here at this meeting, relevant to these topics. And I think the first two keynotes, the one on Wednesday night who had all the data and the one on Thursday morning who talked about the political environment and what we're likely to encounter in terms of budgets. As formidable as some of those topics were, I thought they were, in some sense, a breath of fresh air for us. They were addressing the reality of our situation. So whereas ordinarily we might expect a keynote to be uplifting, this one really helped lay out for us some of the challenges in our current landscape. And I think that's very important for all of us. And then throughout the course of the meeting, the sessions that I attended really had me thinking about this whole concept, which I've been reflecting on for some time now, and perhaps you have as well, about the transition that we seem to be making from being more focused on our content to actually being more focused on the people who not just read, but now have in a digital space an opportunity to interact with our content. What are their concerns? How can we make the content available when they need it in their workflow? AI suggesting something that they would find more useful, or processing their work and coming back and telling them, here are the other references that are relevant to your article or your publication that perhaps you'd want to consult. So I think the future is going to be full of opportunity. The question is, how do we navigate the present to get to it?
Anybody else? Raise your hand. Yeah. Phil?
Yeah, Phil Jones from Digital Science. So the thing that stood out for me from your talk, David, is this concept of the fact that publishing has morphed in a large degree away from being basically magazine sales. It's bringing in content, packaging it up, shipping it out, into a suite of services for the movement of information. Right, it's service provision to allow people to communicate. And that's easy to say, and we kind of recognize ourselves in that. But I think the degree to which the publishing industry can change and should change, I think, is often underestimated. One of the things that has stood out to me recently is one of the talks today, one of the lightning talks, Code Ocean, right, I think is a great example of the way in which the scholarly record is diversifying. We're used to it with data. We've got things like Data Dryad and Figshare, which are giving DOIs to data sets, and people are starting to cite them. And we're starting to see that with code. And in actual fact, I happen to know that the most cited type of object on Figshare is computer code. So it's massively underestimated how important that is. And so Code Ocean is fantastic in allowing people to seamlessly put objects of code onto the web, make them discoverable, give them a DOI, turn them into a first-class research output. And And I think as we go on, we'll see more and more aspects of the research supply chain, the techniques, perhaps in video form. We'll see the code, we'll see the data, we'll see all of the little bits of it. Maybe the lab notebooks. We'll have electronic notebooks that can be pushed directly to the web, and we'll see more and more of that being directly communicated. So I think we need to think of ourselves as basically intermediaries of that information rather than people who curate articles.
Alice, again, who? Yeah.
Okay. Is this on? Yeah, okay. So I want to go back actually a bit to what Judi said. What the thing that seemed lacking, if you like, to me in the talks, I think, was the notion of people, both individually and collectively. And I think, you set out a lot of very real problems and issues that we're all facing, whether as publishers or librarians or service providers or whatever. But call me Pollyanna, I think the way to address those problems is by acting together as a community to focus on what's important to all of us, which is serving the researchers. So I know it's not as simple as that, but I think a lot of the challenges that have been presented are ones that we, through organisations like this, really need to think about how we can address collectively as well as individually.
Anybody else want to go? Okay. I don't know if we have questions yet. I'll start off with one. This has been sort of sticking in my head for this whole meeting. So the opening talk, Paula Stefan talked about how few researchers actually stay in academia, which, if you were in academia 20 years ago, this is no surprise to you. Many of us left for that reason. But thinking about that, and another big part of this meeting was talking about preprints. Get the work out really quickly, stake your claim on it. So if you have a whole cohort of researchers, as the culture turns over, and there are old researchers who still think, if you move out of academia, you're a failure, but they're dying off fairly quickly at this point. So as the culture shifts and you have a cohort, I talked in a session earlier, I was at Hopkins for a day, and I was told very clearly many times that the graduate students know they are not staying in academia. It is made very clear to them. They're all depressed about it, but they know this is the case. So if you're having the people doing the research who, one, know they're not staying in academia and don't have to jump through the impact factor academia hoops because that's not their career path, and two, they now have this outlet of, I'm staking my claim to this, how does that change the publication decision? How does that change the way you decide where to publish your work and how to publish your work? And I want to point right to Kent to start this, because you wrote a really nice piece about slowing the pace of things.
That's right, I did. I'm going to take my time to answer it, too. Oh, boy. There we go. So I do think that we have, and to kind of what Alice said, I don't think that we, actually the majority of the time, serve researchers. I think that's a slice of what we do on the way to serving people who are trying to implement science. And those are practitioners or researchers in a practitioner mode or in a teaching mode. And so to get to that point, I think we need to take more time figuring out what's likely to be true, curating it, and not always being in this mode of let's rush, but let's maybe draw a brighter line between the preprint and the final and say, okay, this is where it is. It's tentative, it's early stakes, it's serving the priority system in some way, but it's not yet been through the community validation steps that we expect it to go through, and it hasn't found its way into some sort of branded output that has a stamp of approval. It's just letting the author make a stake in the priority system. And then slow down. What's the rush at that point? Because then we have to be careful about where it goes. And I think we've kind of all caved into that, or a lot of us have caved into that idea that the way to serve authors is to just work faster and do less in order to serve that. And we have a blurring between the preprint and the published that we could actually brighten up.
Yeah, and that speaks to reproducibility as well. If we're not turning out to get something out really quick, maybe there's time for more statistical review and things like that. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, I'm just, in math, of course we have archive. Archive has coexisted for many years with the rest of the publishing ecosystem in a fairly happy state. And certainly one of the things I know I encountered 4.5 years ago when I joined the AMS was that being on archive is very important. It's a part of the process. And then actually having your publication published in a journal of record is also equally important. But actually this idea of slowing down was inbuilt perhaps through backlogs, but also through other, just a general sense that it doesn't really matter at that point when my paper is published. Now, of course, that's not strictly true. If you're a young scientist coming through, or junior scientist coming through, it actually does matter, and that's something we've been addressing. But there is this sense of slow bake, but baked into this sense of the coexistence with archive.
Yeah, and I think that I've also seen that in astrophysics, where even they have publication of the data, and then there's a time where the astrophysicists go in and say, okay, these are the data that I'm going to bother to write up for a paper that I'm going to put in an archive, then ultimately get into a journal. So there are these different phases of research production where decisions are made, and again, having a really nice clear cut between those seems to be beneficial.
Yeah, I have a point about that, because when you first started saying this, I thought I was going to say, well, I've got a different way to view this, and I disagree with you, but I think what I'm thinking of is similar to what you're thinking of here. And that in a sense, there is one of the inbuilt distortions in the way that science is done is the need to turn every experiment and every observation into a component of a narrative, which means that researchers are necessarily incentivized to come up with the result that they expected to come up with because it fits into that narrative. And with the best will in the world, even the most ethical researcher, that will distort the results that they come up with. Yeah. And so one of the ways in which that can be tackled is separating out the production of data and observation from the narrative. And there's a really interesting startup that's in Switzerland, I think, called Science Matters. And what they're doing is single observation publishing. So you take some data, you create an experiment, you do an experiment, and then you publish it. And then the idea is that somebody else then looks at all of the data that people have taken, all of the observations and the inferences that people have done, and then figures out what the narrative should be. So it's a little bit like, today we have articles and then reviews and then that textbooks of those kind of ranks of different levels of how the knowledge evolves, and the idea is that you can put a step in before that, where you've just got the data, and then you weave that basic narrative.
And I think we've got a question.
Yeah, a question in the back.
Hi, it's Vivian from Burkhan Books. I had a question that kind of picks up a little on what Alice was saying and Kent's people relationships, and I kind of felt like that's missing in what's changed. So how are we as publishers staying relevant? And I think in this drive to create services, speed, efficiencies, what we've created are, and by we I would say the larger publishers, because as a small publisher I think this is what and how will remain relevant and hopefully continue to survive, is sort of that relationship with the author, because there have been these sort of very anonymized services that have now come out of scale. So your production systems, processes are extremely anonymous for the author. So really what you've lost is this relationship with the author. So in terms of not just serving the researcher community, but serving the author. And so how do you see and sort of find a way to scale while retaining that really important relational role that we have with our authors?
I think Kent sort of said the solution already, which is the slow publishing. I think it's completely right that there's far too much emphasis on publishing fast and cutting costs by, driving costs down by certainly a lot of the larger publishers. And as you say, Vivian, that partly jeopardizes the relationship with the author. But I think it also comes back to there's also quality issues there, and overdependence on AI, I think, is something we've seen how fake news has got out there very effectively. I think one of the things that we as publishers can continue to do is to include some of that quality, that human curation, which isn't to say that's perfect by any means, but I think probably some sort of combination of machine-driven AI combined with some sort of human curation and a slower approach to publishing that focuses on quality over quantity and speed at least in some disciplines, it seems to me to be part of the solution.
Yeah, no, I was saying, I think there's an interesting sort of balance there between scale, mega journal, let's do the big scale things up versus this sort of almost journal as community, as this small focused thing where we all come together. Robert, you had a...
No, I wanted to agree with Alice and Vivian and say that perhaps this is where societies really do matter. I mean, when you join a society, your career is embedded in the life of others at that society. It's all about the relationships and people. And as part of the publishing process, it's not just the authoring process, and I think societies are in a good position to take care of their authors, but then we all are as publishers if we do it right. But also it's the reviewer community. What does it mean to review amongst your peers? It's a whole ecosystem, and I think societies are very well placed to sort of provide that relationship base.
Hand that down to David.
So posit a world where, as we pay less attention to the mechanics of getting the content out, we're paying more attention to the relationships. And you could ask yourself the question, if you're a society, what's the function you're providing to your members, right? And you could sit there and you could say, actually, that's a place where we can compete with the big players like Elsevier or whoever else. It's always Elsevier, isn't it? I'm sorry, but it's always... But I think there's a key point there about the service that you can provide directly to your tribe, to your members, to your customers in that area, that's well worth paying attention to as we go through this transition away from the primacy of content to the primacy of the things that surround that. Just to say, if anybody's interested, I think it's Ben Strattery. He writes some very, look him up on Google. He's not a scholarly publisher in any way, but he writes some really deep and insightful articles about how to think in the digital age, and I would highly recommend everybody take some time to look at what he's got to say, because he talks about the wide and shallow strategy versus the deep and niche strategy and how you can both play together.
Yeah, well, I think we found our theme for next year's meeting. It's always Elsevier, isn't it? Do we have a question in the back?
Liz Fathman. I'm from the Missouri Botanical Garden Press and formerly from Elsevier.
It's always Elsevier.
It's always Elsevier. So I have not been a member for very long, and so forgive me if this is a naive question, and it's a little free-range question. This morning I read a tweet that said, when are the mainstream media going to stop asking politicians if they believe in climate change and start asking them, what do they understand about climate change? And so I wonder if an organization like SSP is in a position to advocate or lobby, actually, mainstream media, outlets like Google, Facebook, Twitter, places like that, which have been infiltrated or by the disruptors, as we've seen in the recent elections, and start infiltrating above the boards and getting scholarly information and knowledge out there to the public in ways that are more easily digested.
Yeah, I mean, I should ask Melanie, our executive director. I mean, SSP is deliberately not a lobbying organization. We don't take specific positions on issue. It's sort of the nature of the beast. And it's an interesting question. Is this a...
Yeah, so that's the party line, and that's great. But SSP is an organization of individuals and an organization of organizations, right? So I think that there's no reason why a venue like this couldn't spawn spontaneously, without involving SSP or changing SSP's mission, a group of really smart, informed people. And I've said this to editorial boards over the past 6 months as well. It's time for you guys to realize we're living in a technocracy, that everything has changed, that the people you thought were in power are not in power anymore. The president is an animal created by algorithms in the United States. Brexit was an event created by algorithms, okay? The French election was almost changed by algorithms, so on and so forth. So for your society, for your publishing house, to go to Facebook, arrange a meeting, slam it down and say, look, you're really messing with things that we care about, make a media event of it, invite the press along, tell the local press they're going to love the story if the American Society of Smarter Than You goes there. Go and do it. Because if we sit here and continue to let these algorithm wielders decide what people see and what people think and what they believe, then I think actually the mainstream media to some extent has swallowed this whatever color blue or red, the red pill. And that's the problem. And then we've been kind of thinking this is benign, but it's obviously not.
Yes, just very quickly, if we're thinking about strategies to re-inform the American people particularly, it's worth taking a look at something that's going on both in the UK and I think in Canada and Australia, something called the Science Media Centre. And they're a fantastic organization. They're a not-for-profit, and they were set up in response to things like the MMR scandal. And what happens is when a journalist gets a press release from a university that massively over-eggs what the researchers have actually found, eating 6 bars of chocolate makes you lose weight or stops you getting cancer or whatever it happens to be, the Science Media Centre puts them in touch with an expert, an actual working scientist, and then the working scientist can say, actually, no, this is deeply flawed study, it's completely incorrect, and you shouldn't report this as saying that. Here's what's wrong with it. And it has had a positive effect. It doesn't catch everything, but it has a really demonstrable positive effect on the way that science is covered, certainly in the UK. I've seen its effect, and I think that it doesn't exist in the US, and it needs to.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing as you were both speaking that struck me as really odd. So obviously you saw the tweets that went up about, the UK politicians had enough of experts, right? And that was a narrative that won really well in terms of the referendum debate. As we are sitting here, there is a physicist right now on tour in the UK, and he is doing a stadium tour about cosmology, okay? And he is selling out the O2 Arena in London for 5 nights, okay? And his name is Brian Cox, you may know. And it's absolutely fantastic. And there's a thing about the fact that, weirdly, science and that side of things has almost never been more popular than it has been at this time. And yet we also live in the same world where there's a set of people for whom that stuff has gained massive traction. And then there's another group of people for whom it seems to have completely passed them by. And I think that should give all of us in the room some very great pause.
Thanks, David. We have a question here, and then we have a question from our virtual attendee after that.
Hello, my name is Andrew Harman. I'm from the Endocrine Society, and maybe David will be best suited for this question. We are among a number of small societies, and I'm circling back to the discussion about what societies, what kind of value added and personalization do they offer for their members, the authors on their journals and the like. And I guess my question is, many of those big commercial publishers and, in David's case, the university presses, have societies that they manage publications for. So for those of us who have a stake, a big enough stake that we are looking at third-party players, plugins, other services, what is our leverage with our larger publishing partners when it comes to implementing those resources, those solutions, and finding ways to better serve both our authors and our readers?
Yeah, no, I would say it's, there's a struggle for the society because a lot of the impetus for why you used to join a society is, well, I got a cheap subscription to the journal, but so many people now, I'm at an institution that subscribes, so that's no longer a draw. So there is a sort of constant drive to find what are new member benefits that we can provide and offer. To answer your question, hopefully you have a partner like the Endocrine Society has that is interested in new technologies and is willing to do trials and to implement things like that. And I think there's there's also a cyclical contract cycle that gives you a really strong moment to hold your partner over a barrel and say, this is what we need done. Other thoughts on where societies who do partner with larger publishers can gain more power in that relationship?
I've worked on both sides of the equation. I used to be at Blackwell Publishing, and there was Blackwell Publishing, and worked with societies there. And I think there's a case to be made for both. I mean, in my case, we're resolutely independent. That's one type. But actually, for certain profiles of society, it makes entirely good sense to partner. And one of the reasons is that you can actually really divest of some of the things you really don't have skills to do, and you will make money as well, and you can invest those things in the programs and services and actually talk to your reviewers and your authors if you want. So I don't think the two things are incompatible at all. It really depends on your profile and what your driving forces are for mission. That's what I would say.
Just to add to that a little bit, I would say that one thing that you want to do with your publishing partner is you want to make sure you're having regular kind of strategic alignment sessions. What's important to them, even before you tell them what's important to you. Find out what are they working on, why are they working on it, where are the trends, what do they see happening, and then you can assess whether you're perceiving those trends the same as they are, and then you can have the discussion whether your perception may be more relevant to your organization and you have a gap. And at that point, publishing contracts are negotiated in many different ways, but it's not uncommon that publishers do sometimes reserve funds to help people that maybe don't fit the main mold get certain things done. So, I think you have some options.
And we had a
virtual attendee question in the back.
Hi, this question is on behalf of Duke University Press. They write, at recent past SSP conferences, there has been a focus on increasing diversity across the publishing community. What is the Scholarly Kitchen doing to help increase racial diversity among the chefs?
Yes, it has been a long-running process. So I think one of my first missions was to address the gender disbalance that we have, and I think we're almost 50-50 at this point. We've been talking, about this among ourselves and finding the right way. We're talking to a couple of people who work. It's also not just racial balance; it's also a geographical balance question, because we're talking basically Americans and Western Europeans. So we've been trying to reach out and hopefully adding someone soon from some of the organizations that work in the Global South, that work in the scholarly communications arena, in very diverse in Asia and Africa, places like that, to, if not write about those things, then to hopefully what we really want to do is bring in guest posts from people working in diverse geographical area and of different populations as well.
And I think one more thing is that everybody in this room should take that question to heart, too. The kitchen gets people from the people that are participating in these meetings, and everybody needs to encourage diversity in their organizations. And then that will also, not that we're going to wait for that, but that'll also help us have more diverse people to talk with.
Yeah, and we love guest posts, and many of our bloggers or people who came in and said, can I just write one post on this idea? And then, well, they like that. I'm going to write a second post, and that's how we tend to recruit people at this point. So please do get in touch. And Alice?
I will just echo Anne a little bit, but also specifically point out that, it's not a very good representation here today, sadly, but as David says, in terms of gender, the kitchen is a lot more diverse than it used to be. There's certainly still more work to be done. But I think one of the areas that we've brought up as a challenge for us is getting engagement, for example, in terms of the comments. I think we haven't done as good a job as we need to in terms of making people feel welcome and safe to make comments. It tends to be dominated by a few of the same people, and frankly, they tend to be men on the most part. So, and I understand that I have a lot of women say to me, I wouldn't dare comment on the kitchen, it's too scary. And I think that's, I think two things. I think that reflects on us, but also actually, whether we're women or people of color or any, we all need to take that step forward and make our voices heard, and it's really hard to start with. I was absolutely petrified when I joined the kitchen. I felt like Kent took a big gamble on me. I was terrified. My first few posts, I literally was almost sick. But actually, it does get easier, and so I would really encourage everyone from all your different sort of perspectives, geographies, ethnicities, et cetera, to make that step, to join in the conversation. When you see something, whether it's on the kitchen or elsewhere, that makes you think, that makes you feel like you want to say something, do it, because that's the only way that we will hear your voice.
Yeah, I mean, comments are weird. We struggle from the same forces that everyone else on the internet struggles from, and it's, we have as a collective, we are trying very hard to be nicer to commenters and not just start yelling at people, as we have a history of doing. So sometimes we do better than others, but we do have a lot of people who have very strong voices who continuously comment, and we're trying to like slow them down. So, you know, it's a work in progress, but I just want to say, you know, we had a session about finding your voices as publishers, and I will, for those who didn't attend it, I will repeat the key message of if you don't have someone speaking publicly about the good things that you do, then Tom Reller is your public spokesman. And it was
It's always Elsevier, isn't it?
Right, back this Elsevier, you know, a lot of us complain, well, I'm different than Elsevier, I get blamed for the things that they do. Well, if you're not publicly speaking out about what you do, then that's what you deserve. And we really need, as an industry, to find our voices, because I think what we do is really important and of value. And you know, you heard Kent and David talk about why it's so much more valuable than ever. And if we're afraid to raise our heads above the trench, then that's a problem. So I would love to have many more people writing for the Scholarly Kitchen, and I would love to have us be much less important because there are 30 Scholarly Kitchens out there that are willing to voice opinions.
So Alice said something that I just wanted to mention, is that, you know, while the essays can be, you know, firm in tone and declarative and all of that, I think the chef experience generally has been that, you know, when people come forward, and we've done a lot, Ask the Chefs is a big thing, guest posts are a big thing, bringing people along when they want to write. Ultimately, I think it's, once you do step forward, it's a very welcoming culture. And David has done a lot to make it even more welcoming in the background. There's a lot going on, a lot of discussion when you do join. So I think that this group didn't come together because it's hard to join the Scholarly Kitchen. It came together because it's addictive once you kind of get out there and do it.
Yeah, look at some of the people we've let in.
Yes.
Like you.
Yeah.
But I just want to make one more comment. I know there
It can't be hard if I'm doing it.
Yeah.
There was a question there, and I actually think that there are a lot of us here and that aren't here, that are on the kitchen, that are not shy, that are not, you know, wallflowers, and we're afraid sometimes to comment on the kitchen. I can tell you, and I can tell you from chefs that are not sitting here, we've had these side discussions. I think that, Alice, your point is well taken, and David, not to be contrary, and I'm sorry, because I love you, but it isn't just good enough to say you have to find your voice and do it, because that's how, honestly, that's when you look at the role of women and minorities, that's a way to perpetuate the current state. Like, we have to, I believe that, but I also think we have to do things to help people to do that.
Well, I will say, I think that, I mean, there are times when I'll start to write a comment and I'm like, no, this is not going to go anywhere. It is an intimidating thing to even make a comment, especially because you just don't know where the upside is. And I don't know that that's a measure of success or not, frankly.
Can I just say one last thing, which is I'm really delighted that whoever at Duke asked that question asked it, and that it inspired such a good discussion. So thank you.
Yes, we had a question down front.
Hi, Kristen Pruitt from Wiley. I'm going to read my question, if you guys don't mind. As an early career researcher, I was born into this chaos that we've talked about all week. So do you fear that my generation will become complicit or jaded by these disruptions, or can this be seen as an advantage to anticipating and meeting future challenges and disruptions, you know, e.g. the academia crisis Dr. Stebbin illuminated for us?
So there was an interesting survey, there was a bit interesting article in the Boston Globe magazine last week in print talking about millennials and, you know, the label aside and all of those, you know, kind of illegitimate things about that label. But it was talking about how in opinion polls, they kind of view democracy or autocracy a little bit indifferently. And so that was really striking.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just add, you know, I question, and maybe this is a good question to end on, of are we in a moment of sea change for the entire industry, or is this just part of the continuum, because I feel like, I've been in publishing for 15, 20 years, and I feel like we've always been walking along the cliff edge. It's just a sort of different set of, here's today's crisis. So I'll put this to the panel of, is this different, or is this all just part of a long continuum of evolution and adaptation?
The comment that comes to my mind is a Monty Python expression, which is, it's all doom. Which, to be honest, I've been in this business for quite a long time, more years than I actually care to admit. And it's been the same sense of disruption and definitely doom. The end of journals, the end of this, that, and the other, it's for all of that time. And actually, in some ways, I think this is a time of opportunity, more than it is of dissolution. So that was the message I would have for you. I think this is actually a really exciting time. Don't listen to the people that predict doom.
Yes, I would completely agree, because in the last 25 years, almost everything, every aspect of the publishing world has changed. And there are so many more opportunities. There are so many more, we've always had challenges, but there's so many more opportunities to address those challenges in new and exciting ways. And there's such a diversity of perspectives and interests that are converging in our community. And, I would commend you for, if you need to write down your question, that's an absolutely fine way to do it.
Yeah, and to add on to that, there's also a much lower barrier to entry in a lot of ways for these experiments. You don't have to have a printing press, and you don't have to have a mail room. So, these opportunities are opening up so much more.
So I've seen you for about 45 seconds, and I can tell you that I think you're going to be part of the solution. Just thank you for being here, and I really do think that. Writing down your question, that's great. You do what you have to do, but you're not going to get jaded. Jaded isn't necessarily a generational thing. Jaded is in here.
Yeah, Alice.
I also commend you for standing up, because it isn't an easy thing to do, to stand up, and I know we had a chat earlier. Anyway, I think I would totally say that I have a lot of grounds for optimism. I have children who are probably about the same age as you, scarily. My daughter is a scientist, and she's absolutely passionate about her science. My oldest son's in publishing, and he's absolutely passionate about that. I think possibly we had a bit of a generation in between, my ancient generation, where we went out and marched against CND and March for the Night and all that stuff. And then there seemed to be a kind of more of a complacency, a sort of lack of interest in some of these issues. And I feel like your generation, my children's generation, it's horrible what's happening at the moment, but the really good thing about it is it's a catalyst for change, and that is a catalyst that's being picked up very much by the people for whom it is the future, as it should be. So I would say, great opportunity to be an early career professional or an early career researcher, not without its challenges for sure, but a huge opportunity as well. And so I'm very thankful to have people like you here.
Right. Anybody want the last word, or? I think that's a great place to end. Thanks everyone for coming. Melanie, do you want to wrap things up? And thanks for the great questions.
Thank you so much, David and chefs, for being here to close out the annual meeting with a great look towards the future, but also for what you do day in and day out, providing fresh content for us and new things to think about in your posts. So we really appreciate that. A few quick items before we close the 39th annual meeting. On its way to your inbox, possibly already there, is an online survey. Your feedback is really critical to shaping our future meetings, so we really hope you take a few minutes to let us know what you thought about the meeting and what you want to see next year. And if you missed a session that you were hoping to attend, don't worry. All of the sessions were recorded. Some of the sessions will have a live video feed. Others will be synced with audio, but they'll all be available on our website within about 30 days. So towards the end of the month, look for a notification from us so you can revisit content or check out sessions that you missed. And we have a couple of regional events coming up, and we hope to have even more in the fall, but on June 20th, we have one here in Boston. It's a recap of the annual meeting. And then we have our first international regional event in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And again, I want to thank the program committee and the staff for all their hard work that went into creating this amazing program. Much appreciation to our sponsors and our board of directors as well. And next year, we're going to mix things up a bit. We're going to a new city. We'll be in Chicago. So we hope to see you all in Chicago. And thank you so much for attending. You're all are so much a part of this event, and you're what makes it so wonderful. So safe travels, and hopefully we'll see you next year.